This is Julie Pearson, Little Thunder. Today is Thursday, February 27th, 2020, and I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma at the home of Maxine Zarrow, widow of Jack Zarrow and one of Tulsa's power couples. Maxine, you and your husband have really been civic beacons here in Tulsa, and you sit on various educational, cultural, and hospital boards, including the Jack Zarrow Foundation, which focuses on mental illness. But you and your husband, Jack, are also well-known art collectors and fans of Native art in particular, so that'll be part of our focus today. Where were you born and where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in Wichita Falls, Texas. My parents were living in I believe Vernon, Texas at that time. And my father was gone, and I was born. My grandparents lived in Wichita Falls, and that's where I was born.
Your father was passed away, or?
Yes, my father and mother both passed away.
What did your grandparents do for a living?
My grandfather, I believe, had a store at one time, and my grandmother was sort of the boss in the house, and as I think many of the women were in those days. And I don't have a lot of the time I knew them. They were both of course older, and they were without any things other than their own. They had some real estate, small real estate around their area, Wichita Falls. They lived in Wichita Falls.
How many siblings do you have, and where are you in the lineup?
I'm the youngest, and I had two sisters, Sarah Foreman Herman, and my other sister, my younger sister, between my elder that I just spoke of and myself, the oldest name was Sarah Foreman Herman, and the second, my other sister, was Hannah Foreman Davis.
And what was it like growing up sort of between Vernon, I guess, and Wichita Falls?
Well, actually, I lived in Vernon. That's where I was reared. That's where I went to school, went to high school there.
Right.
And spent all my older days there.
What are your memories of Vernon?
It was a great little town. I had great friends that I kept up till they both just recently had one that passed away. And we didn't see each other, but we did call each other.
Right. And you went to synagogue in Wichita Falls, is that right? What kinds of art were displayed in your home as you were growing up?
Well, actually, it was mainly photographs. And we didn't...
Kind of family photographs?
More or less, yes. And actually, the art part came after I was married with my husband, and I both had an interest in Native American art.
Do you have any memories of the art at the synagogue, for example, or any place in town that might have had some artwork displayed?
Well, that was in Wichita Falls.
Right.
That was where the synagogue was. We lived in Vernon, Texas.
But you occasionally went up to Wichita Falls?
Yes, that's where we went for our, during the high holidays and certain times like that.
Do you have any memories of that artwork there? Or?
Not really. As I remember it, I don't know that there was much artwork there.
So what is your first memory of sort of seeing something that you would describe as art? It doesn't have to be art the way we think of it, but something that just
Well, we had art in the schools,
Okay.
and actually, I think it was when I went off to the university.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it really took hold.
So you weren't, throughout elementary school and kind of junior high and high school, you didn't really take to art classes. You weren't particularly interested.
Well, it was the typical kind that was given in those days, and I don't think that was one of the featured things during the school.
And you weren't too into it.
No. And it was just the side. Now maybe in the larger cities that there was more of a, but not in
More
the
of an
smaller
emphasis.
towns. Yes,
Not there in Vernon. So how did you decide on where you were going to school, to college?
Well, my two sisters went to the University of Oklahoma, and I followed them. And I went to 1 year at OU, and then I decided I wanted to go to the University of Texas, and I transferred and graduated from there.
Okay.
Is that all right now?
Yes.
She still got it on.
No, it's off.
So how did you meet your husband?
I met him at the University of Texas. He had come down midterm, and I think I met him practically the first day he was there. They were at the Hillel, and I had walked in there right before lunchtime, and these fellas were standing around. My cousin was my roommate, and we both had walked into the area that it was in Texas. That was in Austin, and these fellas were sitting around. They had just come midterm to school there, and they thought they were going to be drafted, but then the war was over, and they started in midterm at Texas. And so we met them, and this cousin of mine had a brand new convertible, and it was right before lunchtime, and so the fellas were standing there, and we were leaving, and then she said, "Well, would you all like a ride home to the fraternity house?" So we walked out to this incredible new car that she'd gotten. It was was not a regular car. It was
Something that would impress them.
yeah, it was.
Yeah,
And
convertible. It was a convertible.
It was a convertible, and it was just out of this world. So my cousin said, "Would you like a ride home?" And naturally, they said yes. So we dropped them off at the fraternity house. So about 3 days later, I got a phone call, and it was my future husband asked me out. And I thought, then I thought, oh God, he thinks I'm the one that's got that convertible. And I was worried to death that he had made a mistake. But anyway, that was my first date with my husband.
That's neat. So once you and Jack started dating, did you look at art at the university at all? Did you go to a museum?
Not really. I don't remember. I did take a one semester of art there, but it was not foremost in my mind at that time.
Right. Was it art history or was it actual?
I think it was art history, yes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Not a bad background to have. So you get married and you moved to Tulsa first. How long were you in Tulsa before you went to Pawhuska? As I understand it, you kind of went.
Well, we had a store in Pawhuska. That was the first store.
Was
But
that the
we
first
lived
place you came in Oklahoma? Or
No, we lived
Okay.
in Tulsa.
Gotcha.
And but the first store was in Pawhuska.
Okay. Did the family stay in Tulsa then while the Pawhuska store was running?
Yes,
You
uh-huh.
never lived in Pawhuska?
No, I
Okay.
didn't live there, but we visited there, and we used to go over for all the affairs and things, and I enjoy that time.
Right. So you're just kind of starting your family. You're living in Tulsa. You know, Jack's busy with the business. Have you started looking at art yet or thinking about art for your home yet?
Well, not really. I was busy with little ones at that time, and I really didn't have time for that at that time.
Yes. But I did read that when Jack was working, you know, there would be different Osage families that might come in and sell to him occasionally.
That's right. In fact, there were times that we would wake up in the morning and there'd be people out in the front yard waiting with their wares. I don't know where they found out that we were interested in the artwork, and they had their goods out there ready to show us. So,
What were some of the kinds of things that they brought to sell?
Well, they were mainly things
like beadwork, maybe?
Some beadwork and then some. It was
any little paintings or
well, not to,
baskets.
But they were. We always would partake of them because we felt that they would come take all the trouble of coming in because they'd be in the front yard,
Mm-hmm.
and we'd wake up and find them there, and they knew that we were interested, and they would always come out to the house.
So that was your first exposure to Osage culture,
Yes.
sort of, and getting to know Osage people. What were some of the things that you sort of enjoyed learning about Osage people?
I thought that I loved. We used to go to the to their
Dances,
Their
their
dances,
ceremonial
yes,
dances.
the
You were
powwows,
invited to the
uh-huh.
Ilonshka.
We loved that, and it was something that just got under your skin, and it was so pleasant and so it was a new life to us in a way because we really didn't know too much about that, but we followed many of them.
Right. So took the kids and
Yeah.
and
And
that's
it was-
neat. When did, at some point, I understand that Jack got involved with the board at Gilcrease Museum.
Mm-hmm.
And had you been to the Gilcrease Museum before that? Had you been there looking around yet?
You mean
Before-
No, and
Okay.
neither did Jack.
Okay.
This was a friend of Jack's that was on the board, and he asked Jack about joining the board. And Jack came home to me and said, so and so asked me if I'd be interested in joining the board at Gilcrease, and I really didn't know much about it. And I said, well, I think it would be the greatest thing that could happen to you and to me. And so he joined the board, and that was the beginning.
How neat.
And of course, it was in its early days, sort of, in those days. And they had the little bitty museum down at the end. It wasn't, of course, what is there now, but it was just a small area. And they that was the first board that he was on.
Right. And the city had maybe pretty recently just taken it over, the city of Tulsa.
Well, in ensuing years, but at the beginning it was just mainly something that, and actually I don't think that Gilcrease, Mr. Gilcrease had lived in San Antonio, and he had his collection there at one time, and then he moved back here and brought his art back here, and he was really the person that brought the art and brought that to Tulsa.
What's one of the first events, or what's an event at Gilcrease that kind of stands out in your mind that you?
Well, it was a smaller. There was a smaller board, and it was a smaller. I don't think too many people knew about that collection,
Mm-hmm.
and it started just with things right in, and the museum was not where it sits today. It was on down and down further. Well, I don't know. I don't know what direction it would be, but and it was just and then of course it grew like wildfire, and then Mr. Gilcrease had a lot of his collection, I think, in San Antonio, and he brought them all back to Tulsa.
Brought it back, and
Mhm.
so the board is sort of busy trying to publicize, get
Yes.
the word out about the collection,
Well, and
and
the whole
get it in front of the public.
Gilcrease changed. I mean, it was from a little tiny board and a small collection, because he had a lot of, actually, I think most of his collection was in San Antonio. That's where he had lived.
Mm-hmm.
And then he moved back to Tulsa, and then things started developing, and then he gave it to the city,
Right.
and it just, it
Grew
grew.
from there.
It grew fast.
When you started going to native art shows with Jack,
Mhm.
what are some of the things that you liked the best? Were you attracted to painting or sculpture or pottery, or did it just depend on the individual piece?
It's like asking what's your favorite child, because we were interested in the growth of and because we were really pretty broad. We didn't know too much about art ourselves, and it was a lesson for us, and we sort of grew with the museum, and it was small. First they had small things, and then as far as it was just a gradual growth, and I think a gradual interest in by the city, and I can't tell you, but I can tell you that in the beginning we had just small. Our meetings were small.
Right.
What we showed was small, but then it just grew. It just and the city became interested in it.
She became a gilly. I hate to interrupt.
Yes.
That's really what.
That's
Okay,
right.
this is Gail,
Yeah.
Maxine's daughter, and you
That's
became a gilly. Oh yes, they
Yeah.
have. They've done some great work.
Yes, they do. They do wonderful work. And I joined the Gillies when they, and then of course that was a much later day.
A later
I was
day.
talking about before.
Do you remember the first kind of expensive, what you and Jack would consider an expensive work of art that you bought together? Do you remember the?
This is Holbrook, and I would say that she developed relationships with some of the artists, and you can see a lot of correspondence from Brummett Echohawk, for example, and worked with him and built. It's like they grew up together, and his maturity of his work, and so did they as collectors, and the density of his work.
Great. Yeah, I'm going to ask about relationships with artists here in a minute, so that'll be a good one to follow up on. Thank you. Did you and Jack ever disagree on something to buy, and how did you work that out?
No, we
Always agreed.
we respected each other's likes and dislikes.
So you might want something, he might not care for it as much as you, but
Yes, we
he
respected
wanted you
each
to have
other,
it.
uh-huh.
Yeah. What was part of your impulse behind collecting, it sounds like, is, when you found a piece, you might sort of get to know the artist, as Holbrook mentioned. So one of the artists you developed a relationship with was Brummett Echohawk.
Yes, Brummett was a very good friend of ours, and he was a very talented guy.
Very
and
talented.
He had a hard time, but he never really. I think he was really one of the finest artists that I've known of at that time, and it was not easy because Tulsa had not really I think not. I can't say this, but it was not bound toward that type of art.
People weren't taking native art very seriously
Yes.
at that moment.
Yes. Particularly the native art that they were producing.
Well, and Brummett was he was working in what people would sometimes call a Western style. Some of
Yeah.
his work was in that vein,
Yes.
and that wasn't very accepted.
No, he had wonderful training,
Mm-hmm.
and he was very talented. But he did go. I think he went to the art school in Chicago, not Chicago, but maybe it was Chicago.
Wasn't it the League?
Up east. It was up.
Art Students
Yeah,
League,
it was the Art
possibly?
Institute,
Mhm.
I think. And that because he told the story that he knocked on the door and he said to him, I'm here, I want to be an artist. And they said, well, go home and bring back your portfolio. And he says, well, if I go home, I won't come back. I'm here. And so they let him come in, and of course he was a wonderful artist. And
Did he have to make a death mask or something?
What?
Did he make a mask? There's a great story to be looked into. How he went there and didn't have his portfolio because
That's
it was
right.
so expensive to get him there,
that's right.
and that he basically had to create one on the spot, kind of thing.
Well, all I know is that he said, if I go home, I won't get back.
I won't get back.
Mhm.
That is a great story. And so, yes, any other stories about Brummett that maybe he had to produce?
Well, he was, at that time, I don't know that Tulsa was as bent toward art as it is today, and even at a later date at that time. And he was but he was trained. He was
Mhm.
very well trained because he was up in Chicago, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where he told the story that he went up there and walked in, and he said, she gave him his name, and he was from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he wanted to be an artist. And they said, well, you go home and you do this and you do that. He says, if I go home, I won't get back.
Right.
And so they let him stay, and
That's great.
that's what happened. And he was really, but he came back. He came back, and he wanted to create the same type of work and try to do in Tulsa what he had learned
Right.
through the years.
What are another one or two artists that you remember pretty well?
Are you talking about?
Maybe native artists.
Well, we had quite a few that I can't think of their names right now.
Steve Seltzer?
Huh?
Steve Seltzer?
Oh, but the Seltzer, that was, we had quite a few of their things. And,
He's I think, a Western artist.
yes,
well-known
that was a Western,
artist.
wasn't
Uh-huh.
yeah, it skips my mind because we had quite a few of them.
Right. Yeah, I
We
know
were-
you did.
And we'd wake up sometimes in the morning and there would be people out on the front of our yard waiting for us to get up, but they had gotten the word that we were buying, Native American art, and they had it to sell, and they
This
went-
was in Pahuska, or was
Well,
this in Tulsa too?
No, this was in Tulsa.
Oh, okay.
We lived near the
Mhm.
high school there, and
Oh,
we
Central.
had a big tree in our front yard, and they used to wait out there till we woke up.
So, as you bought pieces, if it was paintings or sculptures or whatever it was, who decided where to put them? Was it you and Jack working together, or how did
Yeah, we
you?
worked together.
Okay.
The things that we always wanted it to be pleasing to both of us, and we like to help some of the younger ones,
Mm-hmm.
and
So you went to some shows at Bacone, as I understand it,
Mhm.
where you
we went
got to buy the work of younger artists.
We did that at several places, and some of them were turned out to be masters, and some of them didn't. But it was we used to go around the ones that were not too far from us, but outside of Tulsa.
You used to drive outside of town. Did you go to maybe the Five Tribes
Yes.
Museum
Oh,
and
yeah.
some of those shows?
Mhm.
Yeah. Neat. And how about Rendezvous? That was an important show for Gilcrease later on.
Yes, it was. Well, that was at that time. I think we were pretty active in Gilcrease. My husband was president of the association for a while, and we always made those shows and were partaking in those, and would always buy something from one of the someone that
Rendezvous
showed.
artist.
Yes,
Is there any particular Rendezvous artist who was kind of a favorite of yours when you met them?
I mean,
Just
there
so
was-
many of
yes,
them.
there was,
Yeah.
and my mind doesn't go back that far.
I understand you have a lot of art. So I understand that as you were collecting then and you started purchasing art, there later on you would start to sort of buy art for yourself. You and your husband would buy a piece, but then you'd start buying a piece for the children here and there, which I think is a wonderful thing. How did you get that idea?
Well, I felt that we'd hoped that they would be interested also and partake of it, and they did. They were very interested, and we were delighted that they would hopefully carry on.
Right, share your same passions. What are one or two special relationships, maybe with gallery owners, that you and Jack cultivated? Were there?
I don't have that. I don't think there were any that were that
Close to you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um,
We then ventured out.
right.
Then after that, and
Right.
we would, but we still like to try to look at the local artists.
Yeah. Did you do any out of state traveling to art shows?
Well, some
Mm-hmm.
at a later date.
Maybe New Mexico. What are some of the places you?
Well, we would go there, but if possible, we'd like to try to keep it
Stick to Oklahoma.
in our area. Yes.
Great. So as Jack went on to, launch some foundations, open other businesses, you found other places to place artwork. What are it didn't all go to your home. You also shared your artwork with some other places.
I at this point, I can't I don't have that.
They kept a lot in the office.
Okay,
'Cause
so
people would come in, you know, customers, and
this is Gail, yeah.
Yes.
So they had a lot at Jack's office.
Yeah, we did.
In the oil business. And then they bought a couple of pieces for Gilcrease too.
I think
As well as
over the
Philbrook,
years they've
possibly.
donated heavily to Gilcrease and
Yeah.
acquisitions.
Mhm.
I had you get to the point that you can so we would buy pieces and see it. Hopefully, most everyone we would want. They were happy to take our choice,
Oh yes, yeah.
and the children also.
Well, and as I understand it, the Jewish faith places a lot of emphasis on sort of, helping others and having this giving spirit. And so you did that with your artwork.
Well, I felt that was the thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a pleasure to go somewhere and see a piece that we thought would look good for someone else, and we enjoyed that.
Right. Did you have any interactions with Alan Hauser that you remember?
No.
Okay. Yeah. And he was in New Mexico pretty early. So is there a kind of, what strikes you? What is it about an artwork that draws your interest? What pulls you in?
Well, it's just like when you're attracted to a person. They had a certain
It has a charisma or an aura about it, a feeling.
and it's just Jack and I didn't like to buy anything without him, and vice versa. But we did at times when we worked together.
Right.
And but that it was both neither one of us was we respected the others, and always, and he had a lot of pieces in his office, and
He never had to leave his artwork because he would be with it here.
Right, and this is Gail. They really didn't, and my mother correct me, they didn't really worry about the monetary appreciation. They bought what they loved, and they bought to help the artists or the local galleries.
Yeah,
they really never thought that that someday they were going to be selling it at Sotheby's or Christie's or worried about.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
That's right.
They just, it was for the love of what they liked, you know.
And that many times people that we knew, we tried to give them a hand too, and pick out. We were interested in, but some were good and some weren't so good. But that was our pleasure.
Well, and as Holbrook mentioned, you kept in touch with some of them. So like with Brummett,
Oh yeah, Brummett
maybe you ended up
was a personal friend.
commissioning some pieces as
Yes.
well.
And buying significant pieces of his works and his portraiture. And then would you say one of your favorite was the one Red Buds on the Cimarron?
Yeah, that was.
The beautiful landscape painting with
Mhm.
this pink tree in it, and sort of atypical of his work.
Well, you like landscapes, I can tell.
Yeah, we got a few of them.
What draws you to landscapes?
I love nature, and I love I liked having them around us.
In terms of Native art, how has collecting increased your understanding of Native cultures? How has it been important in your understanding of Native cultures?
Well, I think they're very honest. And I admire their tenacity for staying with it, because it wasn't easy in the early days. And they needed a few friends to at least get it out there in front of the more people than they could venture.
Right. Yeah.
And,
that early support was
yes.
really important.
It was, and they were, and I think many of them that in the beginning they all, I think most of them did well, and they were. It was a pleasure to find when they would be invited into the different, to show their work at different shows, and we used to travel around, not far, but the ones around here, and try to be there for them. But we really knew how hard it was for them to, because at that time I don't think it was difficult. It was very difficult. Because money was difficult, and people, really had to have a deep feeling to part with it for a piece of something to put on the wall, and it took people to more or less promote them, and that's I think that was just the show was coming along, and you happened to know the person that was doing, and to have them show their work, because they were very shy. They were very shy, and sometimes needed a little pushing.
This is Gail again. I don't know, tell me if I'm right or wrong, but I think being Jewish and, somewhat in knowing what it was like to be kind of the underdog, they were kind of drawn to the plight of the Native Americans. They could kind of understand
That's
a
right.
little bit, what it was like to be persecuted or discriminated against. And I think that they had a wonderful feeling that, hey, we're kind of all in this together as human beings, and part of my dad was pretty religious, and I think he felt that, part of his life's goal was to help repair the world, which is a Jewish saying, to do your part. And I think that they were drawn to the Native Americans. Am I right or wrong?
Absolutely.
That was just kind of something that they felt was their calling.
Because I think in the beginning, Native American art was sort of the thing that was, you'd pick up off the, people would stand out selling their wares, so they did, they really didn't have, in the early days, they weren't really regarded as artists.
Right.
And they needed a push.
You saw that progression, and you helped with that progression.
Well, we tried.
Advocated for that progression of markets and things. So how has collecting art affected you just in general? How has it changed your life?
Well, I think it gave us a feeling that if you're fortunate enough to be able to try to push someone who basically was they were very private and really didn't have that. I think today they've learned a lot, but in those days they were very shy, and they needed some help. They needed somebody to to say
Encourage.
this is great, and because they were very shy, I think is that there were it's just everybody needs somebody to help them along, and particularly when people aren't. That was in the early days,
Right.
particularly for in smaller towns, maybe in the cities and things that it had been, but they needed a push here
Right. Right. You were helping with that.
because we both enjoyed it so,
Mm-hmm.
and
And it's spiritually, it renews you and refreshes
It
you
does.
in a different way
it
than.
does, and I think it gives you here are these people that are so talented, and they just need a little bit of a push. They need somebody to say, "You're great. You try this or try that," and because basically, most of the particularly in our area, they're pretty they were not frightened, but they were more or less sort of stood back and didn't push themselves. They needed a push,
Mhm.
and they needed some help. And and I think that and it gave them courage too to see that they could, that people did respect them and did, but they had to, they were basically, most of the people in this area that were the artists were shy and in the early days, but I think they learned.
Yeah, you need that affirmation to keep going.
Yeah.
We're going to look at a couple of your favorite pieces in here, and I might just have you share something about them if you want, and you don't have to either, but we're going to take a pause here for a second.
Honey, my age, I'll have to think. I'll have to try to.
I'll just have you maybe identify what your
Yeah.
favorite pieces
You do
are.
have a fun story when you went rogue on Jack and bought this piece, the flowers, the petunias.
They kind of look like
And
Georgia.
you had bought, they're not, but you bought that either in Santa Fe, I think, or Santa Barbara maybe. It was on a trip that you were independent of Jack. It's this one on the wall over.
that big kind of purplish flower.
Yeah, the
Pink.
The white, the white ones.
Okay.
It's right here, Maxine, on this wall.
Okay. Yes. So now we're looking at the painting that Maxine went rogue on here.
Yeah.
That was a
Yeah.
good description of it too.
So Maxine, how did you go rogue? What
Well-
happened? You were traveling.
Well, yes, and I saw this painting, and I didn't like to buy anything without Jack either knowing about it or seeing it. And I called him, and he said, "Well, I'll respect your. I'm sure that it'll be great." So that was this one.
And it's one that you didn't part with, so it must really be a favorite.
True.
Okay, so we're looking at,
It's Winter Landscape, Cimarron Iron Bridge by Brummett Echohawk, and it's an oil.
yes,
And then just one thing you need to know is on the back of every single painting and underneath sculptures, there is a detailed note, generally in Jack's handwriting or Maxine's, stating the title of the piece, the artist, and the date they purchased it.
That
the
was
date
Jack.
created.
He was
I don't know
very
many
methodical.
collectors that do that.
I'm gonna get a rag.
very methodical about keeping track
Yes.
of that. That
And
is a
I
great
don't
thing.
know many collectors that do.
That is a great thing to
That
know.
was my husband.
This is Holbrook Lawson. We're highlighting this piece by Harry Jackson because Maxine loves the story behind Sacagawea and her travels and trials and tribulations. But it's important to note in Maxine and Jack Zarrow's collection that sculpture is another integral part of their collection. They have many lovely bronze works that highlight and focus and create a new dimension to their collection.
Yeah, they have some lovely sculpture. Well, Maxine and Holbrook and Gail, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.